the economic impact of the Atlantic slave trade. Let's uncover how this trade, lasting from the 16th to 19th centuries, shaped the world as we know it today. It's the 16th century, and across the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, something terrible is happening: the Atlantic slave trade. This is a tale of how it shook up Africa, leaving a trail of depopulation, disruption, and shattered societies in its wake. All right, let's start with depopulation. Imagine your neighborhood suddenly empties out, people disappearing left and right. That's what happened in Africa. Families torn apart, villages left deserted. The forced migration of Africans to the Americas meant that millions of people were uprooted from their homes. And it wasn't just about people disappearing, it was about the disruption of everything familiar. You see, before this nightmare began, Africa had these intricate trade networks, connecting villages, towns, and regions. But when folks were snatched away, these networks crumbled like a house of cards. Entire economies were thrown into chaos. Traditional African societies and economies fell apart like a sandcastle hit by a giant wave. It was heartbreaking. African societies that had thrived for centuries suddenly found themselves in ruins. With so many people gone, labor shortages struck like a thunderbolt. Worse still, violence and exploitation became the new norm. Imagine waking up every day knowing that you could be next. It's horrifying, right? As if that wasn't bad enough, these brutal changes happened in a flash. But here's the kicker. While Africa bled, a few people got rich. Picture a handful of merchants and investors raking in cash. They saw people as commodities, as things to be bought and sold. They profited from this misery. It's like they made a fortune while the world burned. Meanwhile, the majority of enslaved Africans remained trapped in poverty, facing brutality and despair. These poor souls didn't get a piece of the pie. It was a cruel, cruel time. Chapter 2. Impact on Europe. European merchants and investors saw dollar signs when they got into the slave trade game. These guys weren't in it for a charity walk, that's for sure. They raked in massive profits. We're talking big bucks. How? Well, those enslaved Africans were like gold on legs. They were sold in the Americas for hefty sums, and those profits flowed back to Europe faster than you can say cash money. But here's where it gets interesting. Those profits didn't just disappear into thin air. Nope, they were like rocket fuel for Europe's economic engine. The money made from the slave trade helped fund the Industrial Revolution. Yeah, that's right. All those spinning jennies and steam engines you read about in history class. Some of that moolah came from the slave trade. So, while it brought untold suffering to millions, it also played a major role in shaping the modern world. Now let's talk about colonialism. The slave trade was like jet fuel for European colonial ambitions. They wanted to get a piece of the action in the Americas, and they weren't afraid to flex their military muscles to make it happen. European powers competed fiercely for control of the trade routes and the territories where enslaved Africans were taken. It was like a high-stakes game of chess, with human lives at stake. The competition for control of the trade didn't just shape America's destiny, it had ripple effects worldwide. European nations, especially Britain, France, and Spain, became global powerhouses, all thanks to the riches pouring in from the slave trade. So, in a nutshell, the slave trade wasn't just a dark chapter in history. It was a turbocharger for Europe's rise to dominance on the world stage. It fueled their economies, lined their pockets, and gave them the resources to build empires that would stretch across the globe. Chapter 3. Impact on the Americas. It's the 17th century, and European settlers are rolling up their sleeves, ready to make their fortune in the Americas. But there's a big problem. They need labor to work those sprawling plantations they've set up. Enter the enslaved Africans. These folks were forced to work the fields, turning once uninhabited lands into booming cash crops farms. We're talking about tobacco, sugar, cotton, and more. Enslaved Africans didn't choose this life. They were brutally taken from their homes and families. But their labor was the engine of prosperity for the Americas. These plantations were like money-making machines, and the cruel reality is that they depended on the backbreaking work of those who were enslaved. It's hard to imagine the unimaginable hardships they endured. Now let's get into something uncomfortable: the development of a racial caste system. See, in order to justify this inhumanity, Europeans came up with some messed up ideas about race. They started to categorize people based on their skin color, and used that to justify the enslavement of Africans. Over time, this racial hierarchy became deeply ingrained in American society. White Europeans considered themselves superior, while Africans were seen as inferior. This twisted belief system laid the foundation for centuries of discrimination and inequality. It's like a poison that seeped into the very core of American culture. But here's the thing: you can't crush the spirit of a people. Despite the horrors they faced, enslaved Africans managed to hold on to their culture. And this is where things get interesting. African traditions blended with American life in ways that nobody could have predicted. In the fields, during their rare moments of respite, enslaved Africans would sing songs that carried the rhythms of their homeland. These melodies gave birth to what we now know as gospel, blues, and jazz music. Yep, that's right. The roots of some of America's most iconic musical genres trace back to those plantations. And it wasn't just music. African traditions influenced American cuisine too. Ever had gumbo, jambalaya, or BBQ? Thank enslaved Africans for those mouth-watering delights. They brought their cooking techniques and flavors, creating a fusion that's still savored today. African culture also left its mark on religion. Practices like voodoo and Santeria, rooted in African spirituality, found their way into American religious traditions. It's a testament to the resilience of a people who refused to let go of who they were, even in the darkest of times. Now, let's fast forward to today. The impacts of the Atlantic slave trade are still with us. That racial hierarchy that was born from this dark period still lingers in our society. You can see it in racial disparities in education, employment, and criminal justice. It's like a shadow that won't go away. And let's not forget the cultural legacy. African influence is everywhere, from the rhythms of hip-hop to the words of powerful African-American authors. It's a testament to the enduring power of culture and the resilience of a people who refuse to be erased from history. Chapter 4. What they don't teach in schools. So, we've talked about the big impacts on Africa, Europe, and the Americas. But guess what? There's more to uncover. When it comes to the number of Africans caught up in this terrible trade, we're dealing with a big mystery. Estimates say around 12 to 15 million people were snatched from Africa. But hey, it's not easy counting people who didn't want to be counted, and for obvious reasons. Historical records back then were a bit wobbly, so nailing down an exact number is like trying to catch smoke. But even with all this uncertainty, we know it was a massive and tragic event that shook the world. The trade acted like a bridge connecting different continents: Africa, the Americas, and Europe. It wasn't just about chains and suffering. It was a messed up exchange of resources that powered industries and businesses. You can almost think of it as a twisted form of global trade, except it was built on the pain of millions. Guess what? The echoes of the past still resonate in our world today, especially when it comes to culture. African music, dances, stories, and traditions didn't vanish into thin air when people were taken away. They blended with the cultures of the Americas, shaping a new rhythm that still thumps in the music we love and the dances we groove to. Think about jazz, reggae, hip-hop. They're all part of this mashup of history. And hey, even the pages of books and the strokes of artists' brushes have been influenced by this painful past. Authors and creators draw inspiration from the struggle and strength of those who endured the trade. The past might be in the rearview mirror, but its impact is still riding shotgun in our world today. And that's it from this video. If you have any video suggestions, please let us know in the comments section. Your contribution is always appreciated. And as always, thanks for watching.